Welcome to The Secret Witch Show, the podcast providing a safe and alchemical altar space of conversations which help powerful women escape a half-hearted, spiritless society and rediscover the freedom of living a wildly magical life. Every other week, we explore how to cast aside the wounds of shame, guilt, and fear connected with fully being yourself, so you can grant yourself permission to stop hiding, ground soulfully back into your body, illuminate your whole soul desires, tend your soul, rediscover and reclaim your powerful gifts, express your magic, and manifest your wildest alchemy. There's no better place to become who your heart longs to be. This is where we will guide you into liberation. I'm your host, Nicole Barton, and I'm so excited to dive in. Welcome, magical ones, to the show today. Over the past few months, we have been reclaiming our old format, Lunar News, which is the most divine newsletter filled with all the rich, juicy goodness that we have been sharing during the month. So it has all our most popular posts, it has a gorgeous new moon ritual, and always is centered around themes of the moon. If you are someone who loves to harness the magic of the moon and wants to learn how to manifest a more magical life, and especially has the sense that you're here to be a healer, teacher, or guide and want to step into your gifts, then I would suggest that you subscribe to receive that download into your inbox. It is a gorgeous free resource that is packed full of content that is seriously a gift. Really is actually content that I could easily package and sell. It's so much depth, but it really is a gift that I want to give to you each month. So if you want to join and receive that, please do head to nicolebarton.co.uk/subscribe. On The Secret Witch Show today, though, I'm diving into how we can trust our magical power even when we are in fear. I explore how trust issues can commonly show up for women who are here to be healers, teachers, or guides, which has them lacking confidence in their choices and not fully choosing their gifts. In this episode, I share more about why magic is so much harder to choose to trust compared to the logical, linear, mundane world, and why choosing it is actually important if you are to step into your gifts, and how to do this lovingly. Also exploring how to truly learn to trust our bodies and their wisdom, even if you think you already are. So juicy. Let's dive in. Welcome, magical ones, to a delicious episode on how to trust your magical power even when you're in fear. And this is a big one. This is something that I have seen over and over again comes up for magical women who just really cannot trust and feel that they cannot trust, should I say. It's something I see. Trust is something that women really struggle with, and that can be trusting ourselves, it can be trusting others, it can be trusting magic, whatever it is. Trust seems to be one of the things that magical women really struggle with. And ultimately, all of it is about learning to trust our soul, because when we can do that, we can trust that to lead. But how this can show up, and it's such an important one, I'm just wondering what it is actually around the magical women particularly that feels like they can't trust. And I think what it comes down to actually is this sense of the witch being burned at the stake. When we think about our ancestors and how they would have had this absolutely immense trust in their inner wisdom. And ultimately, when we're talking about the witch, we're talking about a medicine woman who's deeply intuitive, who can deeply trust her body, who can just absolutely be one with her magical power and just ultimately trust her power, trust her magic. When we think about her, that's her in her gold, the witch. When we think about her in shadow, though, if we think about how she was burned at the stake for being in that deep level of trust. We can see how easily it becomes to instead go into the shadow of trust as a magical woman. When we have this sense of like opening to our gifts, opening to this possibility of being a deeply magical witch who can trust her body, trust her soul, it's easy to see that there will be some level of shadow to work through there to be able to arrive at that point around trusting, because it was trusting in her body wisdom and honouring that had the witch burned at the stake by society, that had her killed. So it makes sense for that reason that when we think about trusting ourselves, trusting our magical power, which the witch is a big representation, it's going to be tricky unless we've healed and alchemized that element of ourselves and learned how to trust ourselves. So this can show up for magical women, and this fear can show up particularly by women when they're not taking action what's aligned. If you're a woman who knows that she's meant to be a healer, who knows that she's here to live out her magic, to become a healer, and it's just not taking action on that, then that's a sign that you're out of connection with your trust, your sense of trust. If you're a woman who's not following the call of your body, again, like we were just talking about, that deep sense of trust in our bodies, we have to feel safe and cultivate that security in ourselves to be able to trust our body's wisdom. And that is so challenging in today's society. So these things are also very innocent. Other ways that this can show up, this lack of trust, is in the suppressing of our souls. We might feel called to this journey into soul and yet not be actively taking action into that, not be listening to our soul, not be, really shoving down any visions, any magical things that come in, any signs and synchronicities, not fully honouring what they're calling us to. Not stepping into our gifts, that's another way that this shows up. Not following those breadcrumbs into becoming a healer. Also not believing in your magic, not believing in magic in general. If that is the case, then there may be a great episode for you. And Dean Radin's How to Know If Magic is Real was really, really healing for this particular shadow. But there's also a sense of not believing that you have magic, not trusting that you have a unique remedy to serve into the world. And not trusting magic in general. Like, is magic really real? There's that sense of like, can I really trust magic? Can I really trust that life actually does have my back? Can I really free fall into this? Can I really let go of controlling? Those are all ways that this kind of lack of trust, this shadow around trust, shows up. Doubting you even have a gift, as we talked about, doubting that you're even here to be a healer, even though you feel this call, and you wouldn't feel that call unless you were here for that. Not living from soul purpose, staying stuck in our mundane lives, not trusting that we can actually begin to take steps towards a more magical life. And even shutting down our body's calls. So even if we are hearing the calls, we may be not following them, but we might even be shutting them down altogether and ignoring them, like really not listening to our bodies at all. These are all ways that trust shadow can show up. Really, like one of the biggest things, if we talk about there being three fears that magical women often hit up against that need healing in order to become a healer. There's control, approval and security. And what we're talking about trust is control shadow. The fear of not being in control, the fear of not having tight control, knowing what's happening. And this is something that really, if we do want to be healers, needs to be liberated with the most love possible. It's innocent. It's helpful to remember this is inbuilt. If you're here to be a witch, a magical one, a healer, this is inbuilt into your DNA via this witch wound that we've been talking about. And as I mentioned, Dean Radin has this great episode on how to know magic is real. So if you haven't yet listened to that, I'd also recommend this. But equally, as you do listen to that, it's helpful to remember that searching for proof, searching for evidence that you can trust isn't the way to cultivate trust. So I'm going to talk to that a little bit more in a moment. But essentially, if you're waiting for proof that magic is real, that magic is trustworthy, that you have gifts, that this is okay to trust, you'll be waiting forever. For a few reasons, but mainly because science hasn't caught up with magic. Magic is what isn't yet explainable, though science is catching up and beginning to explain some of the things. I'm thinking of, for example, when I studied yin yoga, and we talk about the pathways, the energetic pathways in the body, there have been maps that were found, they're magical maps of the body that match up now with the science of what's going on there in the tissues. So it's not yet explainable, that is catching up, but very often magic really is just another word for what yet isn't explainable. And this can make it a challenge to trust. So when we first come to stepping into, opening to our gifts to be a healer, a teacher, a guide, we might feel the call, but we've probably be very much in the mundane world, the masculine kind of mundane, controlled way of viewing life, like it's a linear way of viewing life in the mundane world, in the modern world. We like to know exactly what we're doing. We like to know the ABC and the XYZ of creating an outcome, and we feel safe in that. That's that kind of control shadow piece, like we feel safe in knowing. And yet when we come to that initiation into being a healer, that really is one of the biggest things that we have to heal for ourselves. And it's actually, I'm going to talk a little bit more about this, but it's actually one of the things that is kind of, we're missold when we come into being healers, as if it's just like something we need to learn from the mundane logical lens. It's like, okay, I'll go and do a training, I'll go and learn to be a Reiki healer, I'll go and learn to be an aromatherapist. And it's almost like, you know, when you learn to drive and you kind of learn all the XYZ of how to drive, and you go take your test and you've learned it all, like really linear logical ways of passing this test. And then you pass and you get in the car, and that's when your learning how to drive really begins. And I think that's something that isn't necessarily seen by women, by the industry, about becoming a healer, but it's not seen that it's a becoming of being a healer, but there's that kind of messy in between piece where you've learnt to drive, you've learnt to use your therapies, and then there's this whole unknown, unlinear, kind of mysterious, magical world of magical healing, of true magical healing, that needs to be learned to be integrated. You need to become a healer. You need to become okay with the uncertainty, with the magic, with the reality of magic. And it's non-linearity. Like this is why we call it the feminine magic, feminine soul. There's this whole reclamation of the feminine, reclamation of magic as an uncertain thing that needs to happen before we can actually be fully embodied as a healer, because there's the logical learning, and then there's there's all of this piece that then comes up, this fear around trust, this fear around stepping into the unknown, stepping into magic. And that's really a healing piece that needs to be journeyed through in order to become a healer. So there's no waiting for proof. There's no kind of, logical linear way of becoming a healer. It really is a leaning into trust, magic. And I've had my own journeys with this. I've had particularly also this comes up when women are thinking about choosing into journeying with a guide. And this has been very much my own journey. It's where I really started to see my trust shadow. And there's almost like two poles. There's always two shadow poles of any shadow. And when I talk about shadow, really, I'm talking about fear. So we're talking about the shadow pole of trust here on one element, on one side of that, if you imagine it as a pole, on one side of the pole, where women can go, we're in the shadow of trust, when they're in fear around trust, is that they will not trust anyone or anything at all. On the other end of that pole, they can also trust too much and hand over their power. This is what happens largely in the phase of when women are kind of stepping into their gifts and they just give all their power over to quick fixes of becoming a healer. There's these kind of ads on Facebook, these quick fix promises of like, train in Reiki and then you can go off and create a business from it. And there's that missing middle piece, this kind of third way of learning to trust soul that is required before we can fully trust ourselves to be healers. And my own journey with that was very wild. I remember, first and foremost, I was there in the quick fix promises. I trained in virtually every therapy going, not quite, but a lot of therapies over my decade of becoming a healer. And I really gave my power away to thinking that they would fix me. That's that kind of trusting too much piece. And then I swung to the opposite end of the pole and didn't trust at all. Like, I'd gone through all this journey with learning the tools to be a magical one, a healer, and it didn't work. You know, it worked to a degree, but it wasn't creating the results that I really wanted. So I flipped into the opposite end of not trusting at all. I got very disenchanted, very feeling like this industry had lacked integrity, and turned my back on it for a while. And the same happened with my guides. I started to fight against the guides that I had, started to resist their leadership, really mistrusting others. And then the flip side, once I'd alchemized and healed that, I also gave my power away to guides, thinking that they had all the answers. They would know exactly how for me to be a healer in the world, to bring a business into the world. And again, there's this kind of really clear shift in this journey of becoming a healer, of how we can choose into either giving away our power or fighting against being guided. And most women have been in the trusting too much, the handing over their power to guides to fix them, and they can often arrive at this path mistrusting me. And it's just where they've been on the route. It's part of the journey. So if you're like, yeah, I don't really trust a guide, it's actually also part of a leader shadow. When you're here to be a powerful woman who's here to share magic on this earth, there's also going to be an element of like trusting your own power and reclamation of trusting your own power. And if we're mistrusting guides, it's because we're actually being called to be a guide as well. So just as a side note, that's also what's playing into this. But ultimately, all of it is when we're not seeing that it's all a manifestation of our deeper trust shadow. And that's really one of the things that wants healing alchemy to become a fully embodied healer. And when I say embodied healer, that's because the body is so important in trust. Going back to what I was saying about the wisdom of the witch being held in her body, that's very much a part of the path that I share, is this embodiment piece, this body wisdom. And what can happen when women start to arrive at this path is they will either one of two things. Again, we've got the two shadow poles of body wisdom here. We've got women who are not really in their bodies at all. They're not listening to their body signals at all. They're completely overriding them, completely ignoring them. Or they're over trusting their bodies. There's like a hypervigilance about their bodies. Like, what is my body telling me now? And both of these are shadowy. So you might think that, yes, you know, many women have arrived at this path having done a lot of going into the body and trusting, but there's also then this hypervigilance that comes in. There's like a rebellious not trusting of the bodies, or also rebellious only trusting of the body, when actually sometimes the body can also be just responding to the shadow. And often that can have women saying no to things that are really aligned because they're trusting the fear that's showing up in their bodies. When they're hypervigilant, what they can actually be seeing is fear showing up in their bodies and seeing it as a truth when it's actually not. I'm going to dive into that a little bit more just to explain what I mean, because I think it's so important, is that women will often come to making choices and they'll be like, no, my body's feeling like this is a no, when it's actually a yes, but there's some level of fear that's hidden in the body that's not been illuminated because it's unconscious, that's making it look like a no. And that's not me saying do not trust your body, by the way, because the work that I do is to get women to deeply trust their bodies. That's what my path is all about. But I'm illuminating this because there is a third way. There's a third way of learning to trust your soul. And that is really what the Archetypal Apothecary path is about. This isn't about you giving your power to me as a guide or other guides. It's not about rebelling against guides. It's not about ignoring your body, and it's not about taking your body's expression of fear as gospel. The work that I do is very nuanced because it's really an invitation into trusting yourself. And to do that, we need to illuminate the shadow, the fear showing up in your choices, in your body, that is blocking you from really being in the full expression of your soul. And that's because soul is who you are at your core. If you imagine an onion, who you are right at the center is your full soul expression. And then over the years, there's been layers and layers and layers added to that onion of wounding and shadow and fear. And largely those are the layers that are creating for us unconsciously. They're creating sensations in our bodies. So say we have this deep desire to step into being a healer right at the core. That is what our soul is desiring. It's showing us, it's longing for it. It's like there's this lit up feeling in our bodies. We can recognize like we're being called to this. Our hearts are alive. Like, yes, I am here to be a healer and I am fucking terrified. There's this terror of some kind. You may or may not be aware that you're even terrified. Sometimes this can just look like a resistance to magic. Sometimes you might be in the mundane world, know that you're really feeling the call to something more meaningful, but you're not going to resonate yet with being a healer because there's this deep layer of like absolute mistrust of magic. And your body at that point might be like, hell no to magic. Like, just absolutely on all levels, the sensations in your body might be like tight, tense, no. Like there's this no that comes in, and yet if you do the work to illuminate the fear that is there, that is present in your body, you might actually find that underneath that, your body is a hell yes to magic. And it's very difficult to see that from that place because largely those fears, our shadows, are unconscious. This is why this piece about trusting a guide, even if that's you trusting me listening on this podcast and doing your own journey with this, is why it's so important to illuminate the fear around trust of guides, trust of yourself, trust of your body, so that you can actually do the work to start creating more consciously, so that you can reclaim your soul, reclaim your body wisdom. And if you like, we're kind of all walking around largely creating from fear, creating unconsciously, creating from wounding. And so our bodies feel this. So when we base our decisions, as we're very much taught to in the mainstream magical lens without the nuance, if we base our decisions on body alone and just what our body sensations are without looking and doing the shadow work to illuminate like what's really going on here, what shadow is my body expressing, and what's the clean, loving truth beyond that? Like what's beyond this shadow? What's the deeper bodily sensations beyond the shadow? It's when we can do this that we're able to really trust ourselves to make choices, to make aligned choices. This is the key. So our body, we can make choices on our body, but without really illuminating what's there beyond our fear, we're not able to create cleanly from soul. We're not able to know what's truly aligned. And this is why it can feel hard to trust ourselves and to trust others. When we're in this place of not being able to zoom out, see our shadows, see the old stories that are playing in, see the fears, see what is coming up that's being felt in our body, because whatever we're thinking, whatever we're experiencing in the body is coming from what we're creating and coming from the old stories. So if we're in old stories and shame and fear, if we're thinking that way, that is what is going to be manifested in the body. And it's when we start to zoom out and see, okay, what's going on here? What am I thinking? And how is that impacting how my body's manifesting and expressing? Are these symptoms in my body, are these sensations in my body, ones that are coming from fear or love? that is when we can begin to trust ourselves. And if we don't do the work to reclaim ourselves from the layers of wounding, shadow and fear, then we can't trust ourselves. But if we do the work to heal and reclaim that, then we can begin to truly trust ourselves and our bodies. It's like for so many women, they feel this call to magic, they feel this call to their healing gifts. They can feel in their hearts this bubbling up, this aliveness, this juiciness, this like opening to something more. They want to step in, and then fear comes up and their bodies feel this. And if they're used to operating from the unnuanced idea that our bodies know, they will just shut down and ignore their desires. They'll take no action. They'll be like, no, there's fear. This is not aligned right now. This is not the time for me to go into my gifts. When in reality, the time is whenever we choose it to be the time. It's just that we need to learn the tools to love ourselves in the fear that comes up. So if on the other hand, we can see that this is a fear response, there's a deeper, more aligned choice underneath. If we can love that fear, tend it, see what the fear is, love our little girl, let our bodies know it's safe, then our deeper hidden desire feels safer to start to emerge, to come out. We can then see our true soul desire rather than our shadow fear. And it's this discernment that helps us to reclaim our true magical power from the fear. It's like who we are at that center, that core of our soul is purity, and then fear comes in and clouds it. And that's why we can't trust. That's why we get lost. That's why we get confused. That's why we say, I don't know. And a great example of this from a client the other day actually was, she's very much in the work of feminine reclamation. In her heart, in her soul, she's here to embody the feminine, to embody love, truth and power and magic. And she hit up against shadow, this and as I call it, material liberation. She was in a relationship talking to a man, and she felt herself really triggered. Who she is at her core is feminine, love, magic, truth, and yet she went into wounding. And from there she became persecuted. This was her way of this was her response to a trigger. This is her being away from the purity of her soul, and it felt horrible in her body. It was tight, it was tense, it was not open and soft like the true feminine. And so from there, from that response to her body, she would admit herself, she was kind of spiky in her response to him. And it created what she didn't want. And we unpacked this in our session, and her fear of being a victim, her fear of being vulnerable and soft in case she was walked over. And we illuminated her sense of powerlessness. And that was her fear. And seeing that from an elevated state was crucial to her being able to trust herself to know how to maneuver next. Like until that point, until that zooming out and seeing the shadow, this was clouding her true feminine soul expression. And there was pure magic here, because the depths of like sacred rage involved and the healing required to create this differently. But she was able, from that zooming out, from that illumination of her old stories and how they were creating for her, she was able to open and trust her soul. And she took an aligned action to soften, to open, and to heal that generational trauma that had passed down the line about the views of the masculine of men. And she went to this person with a more open, co-creative way of being that was entirely from feminine soul. She was open, vulnerable, soft, and she entirely created a kind and honest response from this particular man who had previously ignored her, triggered her into not feeling heard, seen or respected. So it was her opening into trusting him, trusting her soul, that created what she desired. And I think this story is great because it highlights something crucial. It highlights that part of the reason that we have mistrusted our souls, mistrusted our magic, mistrusted others is because we forget our own power and then try and defend against powerlessness. It's like, to truly trust ourselves, we need to reclaim our power. And this is why majesty is one of the 8 elements of our archetypal apothecary path, because we really need to reclaim our power, our sovereignty in order to learn how to trust our magic. We need to see that we are creating all of life. We need to see that we're creating anything that we say we don't want. We need to learn to trust ourselves to reclaim our power to create what we do want. And it takes a deep level of courage to do that. It's taken me a whole journey into soul to trust that process. And it takes me constantly choosing back into my power when I forget it too. This is, I always say my work isn't done. Yes, I might be walking the path ahead of you, and my work is still my work. So it's not like we just wake up one day and know that we're powerful and magical. Like I said at the beginning, if you're waiting for that to happen until you can trust yourself, you'll be waiting forever. So how do we begin that? Well, firstly, if you want an inquiry, I invite you to begin to look for where you're creating what you don't want and begin to inquire where you're creating that from. Because the more that we can see that we're the ones creating it, the more we can trust ourselves to be able to create powerfully and begin to trust what's true for us. And also, I think another inquiry around trust that would be helpful here, if you're really wanting to start to liberate that, is what is the fear of trusting? What's the fear that comes up for you when you think about trusting others, trusting yourself, trusting soul? And then once you've got that fear and you've illuminated, go deeper. Be like, what's underneath that fear? What would that mean? If the fear is X, what does X mean? What does that mean if that happens? What's the deeper fear underneath? And keep going with that inquiry until you reach the ultimate fear. What would happen? What's the fear of trusting? What's the fear of trusting your soul to choose? It's the fear of trusting your body. So I invite you into that inquiry, but I also just want to share a little bit about my own journey with trusting my creatrix power, because I think this is really crucial to see. When we can see that we have the power to create all of life, when we have the power to, we're already creating all the time. People tend to think that we have to do something to manifest, when the reality is we're creating it all. And I remember my first initiation into my creatrix power was when my face was paralysed. And I'd gone through birth, been a very big portal of not trusting myself. I was birthing my daughter, and it was during COVID. There had been this deep, I'd been in a spiritual path where I'd been completely avoiding my body, completely mistrusting, completely shutting down all my signals, completely just not honoured the wisdom of my body, completely overrided it. And as a result, my face got paralysed. It was like my body was like, okay, you're enough numbing of what I'm trying to show you, have some paralysis. And my soul guide asked me, and she'd agree, she asked me much less sympathetically than I do to my women. She asked me, she just came out with, because I remember sitting there saying, my face is paralysed, like, poor me, what do I do? And she just said, well, why did you create that? Why did you create this paralysis? I remember at the time being so triggered, so horrified, so shocked. And despite that deep trigger, it really opened my eyes to the true creative power that I had, the power that I had to truly create anything, a power that I had not seen before, a power that I hadn't trusted. And from that moment on, I learned that if I was to truly own my power, truly trust myself, truly own my power to heal, I'd have to own my innocent, unconscious creation of everything, including everything that I said I didn't want. And that can also bring up some trust issues, because we can think about, well, okay, if I'm trusting myself and I've created what I say I don't want, how can I trust myself to create? And it's like, because we need to see that we're creating unconsciously and innocently from shadow. And then when we start to trust soul, which is what's beyond the shadow, then we can trust ourselves. But it's seeing that that's the journey, that is the illumination of the fear, the shadow, that allows us to trust our souls and trust us to create what we actually do want. When we're creating from soul, we can't create wrong. And so I began from there to own my power in all areas of my life, to really lean into trusting my soul, to tenderly, softly loving the scared parts of me that were innocently manifesting things unconsciously for me. And I dived into the shadows that I'd been creating a paralyzed face from. And I started to trust my soul and lean in. And in doing so, I healed the paralyzed face that doctors had described as unhealable. So really in trusting myself, trusting my soul more than myself. If we think of self as the human part of us that's like, no, there's all this fear. Trusting my soul, that place beyond the fear, was what had me create magically. And owning our power that way takes deep courage, I know. It was also the thing that had me step fully in my power to create what I said I did want to create, i.e. a soul-led life as a healer with a healed face. So the moral of that story is that we're capable of so much more than we think. It's often one of the fears under trust is not trusting our power. But the more that we step into trusting soul, the more that we're able to harness our power for what we do want, for what is aligned, by choosing things that are aligned. And the medicine for this is to begin to allow ourselves to open our hearts to a new way, to open our hearts to our wisdom, to open to hearing truth, to open to possibility, even if that's terrifying. You know, we can go into this at our soul's pace. We can step in tenderly, slowly. As long as we are stepping in, we are leaning into trust. And I had absolutely no trust back when I had a paralyzed face that I could heal myself. I remember crying, sobbing daily, like, how am I ever going to have a face that works? Like, I deeply, it was even like the side of my face that I loved most. I know that sounds weird, but like the right hand side of my face was like the side that I loved. It's my selfie side. And I remember being absolutely traumatized because I just had this beautiful new baby. I was envisaging when I was pregnant, like these beautiful photos with me wearing makeup, and I don't know what possessed me to think that was going to be a thing in birth. But like the reality was, because I was creating from shadow, I created it in a way that just wasn't what I wanted. Like my eye was taped shut. I didn't get any beautiful photos of me like cradling my newborn baby with my able to smile. I wasn't able to smile. And it was really owning that I had created that. And the way that I saw that I created it was because when I was ill, when I was paralyzed, I didn't have to step into my power. I was able to just receive, be rescued and receive love, and not having to really own my power and step into my true power. And so I had no trust that I could do that. And yet, despite sobbing, despite feeling it was impossible, the more I stepped into trusting, the more I stepped into my power. Even though I'd healed it, healed loads of things a million times over and healed others, I still didn't believe that I could fully heal my paralyzed face, because doctors were telling me it was impossible. And yet, slowly but surely, as I stepped into healing all the shadow that was in the way, all the fear of not being able to do it, and taking that plunge into trusting my body wisdom, trusting the little nudges that it had to go down a more holistic route, trusting the tender massage, the softness. There's so much magical synchronicity in there. I was working with the Queen as an archetype at the time, and I found this team of people who healed the exact paralysis of Bell's palsy that I had. And they sent me this book, and it had all about the Queen archetype in it. And it was like the same exact piece of work that I was doing in archetypal work. And I had no idea that they worked archetypally. So much synchronicity. The more that I trusted my soul into the choices, into leaning into, okay, I'm going to take this route into healing. Like, it just reinforced so much magical synchronicity. Like, yes, this is the way. This is the way. This sovereignty piece, this queenly piece is what is going to heal you. And it was owning my power. I really truly believe now that piece around paralysis was showing me that I was feeling helpless. I was feeling paralyzed in life, and I was able to own my power. I wasn't paralyzed. I was able to choose life differently. And even when that was terrifying, I was able to cure my incurable face. And it was also the initiation that had me discover my deepest purpose. And these portals often are. But ultimately, choosing our magical power does require trust. Trust that we can lean in, and trust that we can take the tender first steps. And it is a choosing. It often requires us to heal ourselves in all the places we hadn't yet seen. And so many magical women, as I said, are sold this story that we can just train in a healing modality and immediately create clients. And that quick fix approach that kind of plasters over the real route required to becoming a magical healer. And I say this with vulnerability because it takes me courage to say, actually, this is the real way. This is the route that's coming from integrity that may take longer than other people say. Like, that's vulnerable for me to say because, of course, I'm here to serve, and that's kind of off-putting for women. And yet the reality is that we can become a healer in 3 years if we go down this particular route, whereas it might take 10 years like it took me if we go down the quick fix route. Like, I've created this path so that you can benefit from the huge wisdom I've gained about quick fixes and how to become a healer in my over a decade of becoming a healer. And I've put it into a path that takes 3 years. It's cost me £65,000. I added it up the other day to become a healer, and I put it into this path, which is much less investment, much faster. And yet 3 years still for some women, when they're comparing it to these quick fix options, seems like a long time. And part of that approach to becoming a magical healer is learning to cultivate trust, to choose trust in our magical power. My point of view is that there are 3 stages to becoming a healer. There's healing the healer, healing yourself. There's discovery, which is discovering your gifts, discovering your unique medicine, not necessarily your tools, but your unique archetypal medicine that you're here to express into the earth. And expression, learning the tools to actually bring that into the world and express that into the world. And healing, that first step, is the step that most women want to skip, want to miss out. Healing the fear of control, approval, and security that comes up when we think about leaning into trusting our magical power. And that's why I've created this path to guide women through these 3 steps, so that you can become a healer, so that you can lean in gently, you can take the tender first steps. If you are struggling with trusting, then that is part of that first phase of healing. It's something that's not addressed in other healing paths. And without these 3 steps, I really do see women going round and round in quick fixes that just don't have them able to trust their magic. They waste time, they waste money, they waste energy, they feel frustrated. That was where I was. That's why I've created this path. And it breaks my heart. That is why majesty is one of the 8 elements of my path. It's why opening is one of the 8 elements. It's why liberation of shadow is one of the 8 elements. These 3 things particularly are crucial in learning to trust our magic. And it's what has had me create my magical business, and I continue to lean into that despite it continuing to feel vulnerable and edgy. The more that we do, the more that we can learn to trust ourselves. But it really is a choosing. It requires us to choose to trust. And that requires, first and foremost, us to be loving to ourselves. It requires us to really be tender, to have that soft, open energy and loving ourselves. So I'm going to leave it there. I would invite you to be in that inquiry that I shared earlier around what is the fear that comes up when you think about trusting your magic. That's a really potent inquiry, just really being with what fear comes up when I think about trusting my magic, when I think about trusting my power. And love yourself in that. That is my deepest inquiry. Like, whenever we think about shadow, when we think about fear, when we start to illuminate what it is that's really holding us back, if we can't do that lovingly, then it's really challenging to see what the shadow is. So that's my invitation. Remember, this is innocent. Remember, our little girl is trying to keep us safe if she's not allowing us to trust. Don't get frustrated with the parts of you that are like, I can't trust this. Love yourself. Meet yourself there. There's nothing more important than being honest and truthful with where we are at. And so often magical ones can be tempted to just bounce out of that. And I really feel your heart if that is where you are. But please do come back to the body, come back to what is showing you and ascertain, is it fear, is it truth? And if it's fear, which part of you wants love? I'm going to leave it there. I'd love to hear what came up for you in this episode, and please do share. If you want to join us in the Secret Witch Society on Facebook, please do. That's where lots of the magic happens. So we'd love to have you. I'd love to hear what this brought alive for you, and I am sending you so much love. I'm feeling so much love in my heart for all of the magical women who are really wanting to lean into trust. Here are my takeaways. Trusting our magic is something that women often struggle with, especially when they are stepping into their healing gifts. The logical, linear world prefers us to be certain and to know, and we've been conditioned into this way, yet the magical healing lens is one of being in the feminine mystery. So this same approach just won't work. Searching for proof that we can trust magic isn't the way, because magic is everything that isn't yet explained. The real healing liberation is in choosing to lean into trust, into the uncertainty, and tend ourselves so that we can. When we start to illuminate our shadows, we start to learn that we can actually trust our souls, the truth that is hidden underneath our fears, and that's the way to create magic. We are powerful creatrixes, and part of the reason we don't trust magic is because we don't see that. We often feel helpless and out of control, which has us mistrust our souls. If we can choose to reclaim our power and heal the parts of ourselves that are scared, we can begin to trust ourselves to create what we do want in alignment with our souls. I'm going to actually complete this episode with an unusual way. I wanted to just share a quote that's one of my favourites that helped me to lean into trust. It's by Terence McKenna. Nature loves courage. You make the commitment, and nature will respond to that commitment by removing impossible obstacles. Dream the impossible dream, and the world will not grind you under. It will lift you up. This is the trick. This is what all these teachers and philosophers who really counted, who really touched the alchemical gold, this is what they understood. This is the shamanic dance in the waterfall. This is how magic is done, by hurling yourself into the abyss and discovering it's a featherbed. Lots of love. If you'd like to get the show notes and links for everything we've chatted about in this episode, head to www.secretwitch.co.uk. If you know a secret witch who would love this episode, please share with them to help them liberate themselves. And so you don't miss out on next week's episode, head to your podcast app of choice and hit subscribe. Thank you so much for listening. I'll see you next time.